السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. جزاك الله خير. So, continuing our efforts to highlight geopolitics, going through this theme, inshallah, during the month of Ramadan. Last week, we spoke about the story of Prophet Ayyub alayhi salam. This week, I want to bring you closer to, and we will keep getting closer to our time, inshallah, until by the end of Ramadan, we'll be speaking about things that are happening right now. However, going from the time of Prophet Ayyub alayhi salam, I want to today talk about a very crucial incident that happened during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So during the 6th year of Hijrah, year number 6 of the Islamic calendar, 1,400 of the Sahabas put on their ihram, and they decided to go from Medina to Mecca to perform Umrah. They only took with them very light personal protection weapons like people carry that time when they travel. Maybe a sword, maybe a small knife, maybe something like that. And they went to Mecca to perform Umrah. Who was in Mecca? Quraysh. And at that time, Quraysh was majority in Mecca. The majority of them were non-Muslims, and they were enemies of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Quraysh heard of the news. So they gathered an army and they decided to go and fight these Sahabas who are coming for Umrah. They took on all their weapons, they gathered their supporting tribes, and they headed outside of Mecca towards Medina to meet the Sahaba who are coming for Umrah. So it would have been a slaughter if that would have happened. However, subhanallah, things changed, and a lot of wise people of that time, Muslim or non-Muslim, intervened. And the conclusion of that was the Treaty of Hudaybiyyah, or Sulh al-Hudaybiyyah. That was the conclusion of that intervention. However, that intervention at that time, and that treaty at that time, seemed to be a treaty that was not in favor of Muslims. Seemed to many people. Even Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was very angry at the start when that treaty was signed. He was very unhappy. He thought this was unfair towards Muslims and towards Islam. Now, why he thought it's unfair? Let's look at what was included in that treaty by Quraysh. Number one, there is no Umrah that year. So the Sahaba had to head back to Medina without doing Umrah, and no one can come back and do Umrah throughout that year. That was number one. Number two, the treaty said 10-year truce. That means there will be no war for 10 years. That was good. The third term, if a person from Mecca converts to Islam and flees Mecca to Medina, the Prophet ﷺ has to return him back to Mecca. And vice versa. And vice versa. Number four, any tribe that decides to join Islam as a whole tribe, or decides to leave Islam, or decides to join Quraysh, they can freely do that. So anyone else is free to do what they want. So many of the Sahaba and many of the Muslims of that time, their reaction was very negative towards this treaty. They thought that we can't do Umrah. If our brothers who flee Mecca and convert to Islam and join us, we have to send them back to Mecca or send them away from Medina. So they felt this was a very bad treaty. However, the Prophet ﷺ agreed to it immediately because he saw the wisdom in that treaty and how that treaty could benefit Muslims and Islam in the long term, right? So what's the biggest benefit of that treaty? That the benefit that the majority of the people, majority of the Sahaba did not even see. That treaty meant that Islam at that time became a legal, recognized entity. Because you wouldn't go and sign a treaty with someone you don't recognize. You don't go sign a treaty with a country you don't recognize. No, you go sign a treaty with a legal entity. So that in itself was a big victory for Islam, that Islam is now recognized as a set of people. Number two, now growth doesn't happen during war. Growth always happens during peace. So signing the treaty was a way for Muslims and the Prophet ﷺ to start handling in-house issues, restructuring the community, building the community, and ensuring growth within the community, trading with other tribes and so on. All that happens during peace, and all that was possible due to the treaty. Now, another benefit that came about was a trap that Quraysh set for themselves. Now, when they say when a person converts to Islam and leaves Mecca to Medina, you guys have to send him back. Now, the Sahaba, the Prophet ﷺ, adhered to that term. Anyone who would come, they say, sorry, we signed a treaty, you cannot stay in Medina. Now, that person understands why the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba are saying that. So where is their anger now? Their anger is towards Quraysh. So a group of people started to gather outside Mecca of newly converted Muslims who have hatred towards Quraysh, that they could not let them go to Medina. And that group of people started to invade, not to say Mecca as a city, but any caravan would leave Mecca, they would attack it. And business was the soul of Mecca at that time, the soul of Quraysh. So they started to attack caravans and businesses that belonged to Quraysh and cost them financially way more than if they would have just let them go to Medina. So that in a way weakened Quraysh. So by the time Fath Mecca came, Quraysh wasn't as strong as it is because of that group of small Muslims who they refused to allow them to go to Medina. So that was a huge benefit as well for this treaty. And finally, all these things that happened led to the conquest of Mecca just 2 years after that treaty. Because Quraysh did not adhere to the treaty like the Prophet ﷺ did. So because of that, because they broke the treaty, that was a reason for the Prophet ﷺ to call for the Sahaba, to call for all the believers to come and join for this conquest, to go to Mecca. So 10,000 people answered that. And they went and they conquered Mecca even without a fight. And all that happened because the Prophet ﷺ saw the wisdom and saw the benefit of that treaty and the long-term benefit it could give to us. Now, having said that, we learned that strategy requires patience. When you plan something long-term, you need to be patient in order for you to see the results of that agreement. We see a lot of agreements and treaties being signed right now every day, right? And sometimes we don't see the wisdom in them, but however, whoever Allah gives the wisdom to will actually see the long-term benefit of that. Also, another benefit we get from this is that the Prophet ﷺ preferred diplomacy over war. He rather signed that treaty that time than to go to war and lose the life of Muslims. And also, when you see in the time of war, like they say in Arabic, they say, al-harb khud'a. So during the time of wars, if you see there is a way for you to weaken your enemy without losing a life, that's a strategy that you should follow, and that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. He knew what would happen if he sent the new Muslims away from Medina. He knew their hatred would be towards Quraysh. And without him intervening, without him telling them to do anything, they actually kept on attacking Quraysh and attacking Quraysh caravan until they financially made them not able to raise a big army. And finally, growth comes in peace. So we as a ummah, as a struggling ummah right now, although there are conflicts in many places, we as a community right now, we have the blessings of Allah that we live in peace here. So that's an opportunity for us to use that time for us to grow, for our families to grow, for our kids to grow, for our community to grow. And growing means what? Growing physically? No, it means growing our knowledge, growing our ability, growing our skills, and using this time to do that. This is the time to do that. Jazakumullah khair for listening, and may Allah bless you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.